Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Mazik. I'm with Excel in Ed. I'm a senior policy advisor in the area of school choice. And today our topic is going to be ESAs, or education savings accounts, and how we can help parents navigate depending on their particular states. So just as a little background, we know that in the past 5 years, we've had at least 22 states that have introduced amendments to their current school choice options for parents, which includes parents being able to utilize those funds in a way that best meets the needs of their child. We also know that of those 22 states, we have 18 states now that do employ education savings accounts, or as we term it here in Florida, education scholarship accounts. We all need to get on the same page at some point. But anyway, what we'd like to do is we have a great panel here that's going to tell everyone how they're working in their respective states, how they're meeting the parents where they are. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So I'd like to start, please, with Representative Cordelli.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with this fascinating panel, and looking forward to the discussion this morning. I am a member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives. I am starting my 7th term. All my experience has been on the Education Committee. I am currently the Vice Chairman of the Education Committee. And actually in New Hampshire, we call them education freedom accounts, which I think is a better description. And after all, this is the live free or die state.
Thank you. Thanks, Rep. Cordelli. I'd like to move now to Colleen Dipple, please.
Hi there. I'm Colleen Dipple, the founder and CEO of Families Empowered. We provide parents with free bilingual education advisory or parent navigation services. We've been doing that in Texas for 15 years. We've served over 108,000 families, which we're really proud of. And then we helped incubate 2 new education advisory organizations, one in Florida, and partnering with Step Up to do that work. It's been really interesting, which is an ESA state, and then also in Arizona. So we've been serving a small number of families in Arizona since 2020. And so really happy to be here and excited to hear from the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Colleen. Justin.
Hey, everyone. Pleasure to be with you this morning. My name is Justin Dent. I'm the founder and executive director of Outschool.org. And at Outschool.org, we really focus on ensuring that families who traditionally haven't had choice or access to choice have the resources and the knowledge and know-how to navigate their education decisions with confidence. I come at this work from being really the product of a parent who had a great ability to navigate the education system on her own. Despite being low income, as a child, I had the great privilege to move between private school, charter school, and public school, really just based on what I needed. And so the work that we do at Outschool.org today is really to ensure that every family has that same ability. Outschool.org started by providing scholarships to families directly. And so in that work, we provided over 30,000 scholarships to families starting in the pandemic to make sure that families could access online resources and in-person resources in their communities. And through that, we saw to what extent navigation services were necessary to help families make use of new education opportunities. And we've since translated a lot of that work into working with states like Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia in terms of helping them launch either their microgrant programs or their ESA programs, which are largely focused on low-income learners. And so helping low-income families make the most of those programs in their kind of early stages.
Okay. Thank you, Justin. And I also noticed that during the pandemic, you offered a lot of those online courses for free. So thank you for that. I'd like to move to Travis, please. Travis Pillow.
Hi, I'm Travis Pillow. I am Director of Thought Leadership at Step Up for Students. We are a nonprofit organization approved by the Florida Board of Education to administer 6 scholarship programs in Florida. And that includes options for students who need help affording tuition for a private school, students who do not attend any school full-time and want to really assemble a fully customized education, students with unique abilities, which is our preferred term for special needs, and then students who attend public school and receive additional grants to help defray the cost of transportation or supplemental tutoring. Between those programs combined, we will be serving over 500,000 Florida students this year to access a learning option of their choice. And we do all of this in close partnership with the Florida Department of Education. In my role, I really spend a lot of my time obsessing over 2 questions. First of all, with more and more states coming online and offering similar programs, how can we in Florida help them learn some of our battle-tested lessons about what it takes to make these programs possible? And number 2, as the number of peer states, more and more states are coming online and offering these options to students, how can Florida learn the best of what other states are figuring out to continue to improve our service to students and families?
All right, thank you, Travis. Okay, I'd like to move right into the questions. And Colleen, at the risk of putting you on the spot, I want to start with you. Given your background, and you mentioned the bilingual piece of reaching out. So, how has your organization in Texas been able to reach those families where they are, so to speak,
Yeah.
understanding both that socioeconomic piece as well as students with exceptional needs?
Yeah, so we've been serving families for 15 years. And when I founded the organization, we really didn't know what families were going to want and need. We had some thoughts about it. So we did spend, and just as a point of reference, in the first year, we had 16,000 families, many of whom, so the majority of families we serve live on about $60,000 a year or less. In year 1, we had about 6,000 families opt into our service in just Houston alone. And so we had this moment of, oh my goodness, parents do need and want help. They are capable of making good choices, but they do need a little assistance and support. And so we spent the first, 2 to 3 years actually surveying parents. We worked with Rice to conduct a survey, and then did a lot of listening to build our strategy really around the customer. And parents for us are our customers. They don't pay. We're a non-for-profit and funded largely by philanthropic support. But we really, to your point, we pride ourselves on leading by listening and meeting parents where they are. So over time, our direct service to families has evolved. And in some cases, so we have a call center, a bilingual call center that operates 12 months out of the year. And what we provide is information, access, and then often sort of just a little plan. So we have a big Salesforce infrastructure that allows us to communicate via text, via email, and via phone. Every phone call that we make to parents is recorded. And so we're able to look at like the analytics of so how long is the average call? We can quality assure that the folks that we're hiring are actually providing accurate, actionable information. We also pride ourselves, for example, on providing sector neutral information. So it's not just focused on a certain kind of governance. So we provide information about traditional public schools, charter schools, magnet schools, private schools, and in the cases where there are ESAs, and on ESAs, because we really don't put our thumb on the scale of kind of where folks ought to send their children or the type of schooling they should engage in. We don't get funded based on where a child ends up or the utilization of one program over the other. We're funded to literally provide support to parents. So we have, a communications infrastructure. Some parents enjoy texting, so we can remind them about application deadlines. It's simple for them. Other parents want to talk to someone at our call center, and then we host live events, right? So we have big, huge fairs, we have smaller fairs. And as I said, the majority of our parents qualify for Title I funding. Many speak Spanish, as they prefer Spanish. They're bilingual, but they would prefer Spanish. So it's a job requirement to work on our program team to be bilingual. And so, we host big, huge events. We love National School Choice Week. We do those kind of awesome events, but then we do these smaller events throughout the year in partnership with places like food banks and children's museums and community centers and parks, places where parents can go that are free, that are child friendly. There's lots of parking. So we really like, and then some of our school partners. So we have smaller events. We do not, we aren't like a storefront. So we don't have like deep counseling. We realize parents don't need a lot of that. They're not, struggling. They just need assistance. And so usually once you have one quick phone call, the average phone call is only 10 to 15 minutes long. And then we can follow up with an email and a text, and then we can remind them. So Salesforce allows you to automate to a lot of like communications and follow up and track that. So yeah, we spent the first 3 years kind of building a communications infrastructure, surveying parents. And then lastly, what I'll say is we also, with the help actually of the Stand Together Foundation, we do annual performance management surveys. So we actually ask parents about our performance, and we do think that we can measure the impact that we make on them. And so impact is not measured by us on what kind of school they choose or filling certain kinds of schools. Impact is based on Net Promoter Score, the neutrality of our service, and the quality that we provide as told to us by parents. So we've structured our impact measurement around the parent experience, not necessarily about the school where they end up.
Okay, thank you. And so moving from that, both Justin and Colleen, you operate these nonprofits, and I'm just wondering, I'd like to direct this to Justin. So where does your audience come from? You've reached these thousands and thousands of families, but how have you reached them, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work in a few different ways. So one of the ways that we started in this work was by providing kind of philanthropically sponsored and privately sponsored micro grants, if you will, to local communities where we had an interested funder. So, for instance, in Grand Rapids, we partnered with a local community-based organization called Grand Rapids AGR, where we provided um, essentially prepaid debit cards to families that gave a few hundred low-income families who had never really had the access or the ability to really afford enrichment activities, the ability to finally go out into their communities and take advantage of all the really great resources that were there. And not surprisingly, to anyone who has ever been able to participate in enrichment activities or families who have been able to provide that for their children, that creates really life-changing and childhood-changing experiences. And so when we work in that way, in terms of providing our own funds or private funds to families in these kind of administered microgrants, what we really find important is to center community. So we work with organizations who have already had longstanding ties and commitments to the community, such as Amplify Grand Rapids. And so we really work in coordination with what we call community partners, who are just those local organizations who have been in communities for decades. And that's one way that, similar to what Colleen does, is we really work to center the family experience. And we also recognize that a lot of families aren't doing this on their own, right? That community, and so many of us have found community as a critical aspect in the way that we find our own way through education, right? It's talking to peers, it's talking to our friends, to see what they're doing for their children. And that's one of the reasons that we really so enjoy and find it critical to the work that we do, to center both families and community organizations in the work that we do. That work in the way of providing kind of private administered funds and microgrants is what led us to the work that we do with states who are either implementing their own publicly funded microgrants or ESAs. When we work with those states, it's different because we are then working with families who have already enrolled in the state's program. So, for instance, in Virginia and South Carolina, we're able to work with the State Department of Education or whoever is administering the program and the wallet provider, which is generally a kind of key third party or second party in a lot of states with ESAs who help to manage the transactions from the state and manage those funds between families. And we then work with the wallet provider and the state to get a list of families who have already enrolled in the services or who have enrolled in the program, and then may be in need of additional services in the way of education advisory or navigation services. And what we have found is, that even though a lot of families have obviously gone through the very sometimes onerous process of enrolling in these programs and getting approved for these programs, that is not a guarantee that they are then going to be able to use this program seamlessly, or that they're even going to still necessarily take advantage of the program once enrolled with it. And so we have found the ability to kind of receive direct information from the state in terms of who's enrolled in this program, and then just the ability to then reach them directly, really in kind of means very similar to what Colleen mentioned, is super helpful in the way of helping families to actually actualize their enrollment in this program. And the power of a phone call just goes a long way. And so what we do with these lists a lot of the times is we just call, right? And we'll talk to, and families pick up. I think a lot of people might underestimate the power of phone call, but it's really sometimes a 5-minute conversation in the grocery store followed by an email that gets a family to then increase, to really say, oh yeah, I forgot I had access to this and now I'm going to use it. And so that kind of connection, though, to your point, Laura, with the state, where we're able to have that direct relationship and know who's involved in the program, and also know who's not utilizing the program or who's hit a roadblock, has been really critical in our way to, in our ability to help really design a suite of services and a communication infrastructure that can in turn meet families where they are.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Justin. And I really love the fact that regardless what a state's legislation reads, that what you and Colleen do can cross state lines, obviously. So I'd like to pivot over to Rep. Cordelli. And I'm just very curious about what was, so you were the original orchestrator of the EFA in New Hampshire. So I'm curious, what was the thought process behind that? Obviously, you saw the need for it, but how did you anticipate, once it came to fruition, reaching those parents? Rep. Cordelli, you're still on mute.
Thank you. Yes, I put in my first education savings account bill back in 2016. It was a study committee to study the concept in New Hampshire, and it was defeated. So we've come a long way from there. In 2018, I thought I was very clever. I got a senator to put in a universal ESA bill or EFA bill, and we put in one for special needs in the House. The House special needs bill got defeated, and the Senate bill passed, but ultimately was defeated by in the House by 7 votes. And if you don't know, New Hampshire House of Representatives has 400 members, so 7 votes is not too many. But we finally passed the bill in 2021, and it does have an income cap, and we use a third-party children's scholarship fund to administer the program. They were already lined up to administer our tax credit scholarship program, so it was a natural fit to expand the administration with them. And I wanted to avoid a government entity running the program, administering the program. So they have done a lot of work in that regard, and have recently started a ambassadors program, as they call it, to train people to answer questions about the education freedom accounts. But I think we need to go beyond that and open it up to all forms of education alternatives for parents. So I did a business plan about a year ago for that, and then found this fall a small nonprofit over in the western part of the state who had a similar idea. So we have joined forces, and this organization, Education Options, has a basic website where parents can find education options websites by county. And they have started doing small expos or school option fairs around the state. And we are currently in the process of fundraising to expand that and to grow our website so we can do some of the things that Colleen and Justin have talked about. And that is really the next step for us in terms of expanding education freedom in New Hampshire and letting parents know what options there are out there and maybe what options might be a good fit for their children.
So it sounds like what you're incorporating is much like what Colleen has suggested, is there's kind of a one-stop shop for parents that's just covers the gamut of education choice.
Right.
I'm assuming that the answer to this question is that your general thoughts on having a nonprofit partner to help serve these families, that you're a big thumbs up on that.
Yes, without question. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Agreed. All right, Travis, I want to talk to you just a little bit about something that's going on in Florida. It's part of legislation, and that's particularly, we call it in Florida, the navigators. So can you just speak a little bit about how these parent navigators work and the, on the ground work?
Yes, and so in 2000, in the 23-24 school year, Florida became the first state in the nation to really have a established state policy creating a funding mechanism for a service provider called Choice Navigators. And what we've seen as a growing number of organizations have taken advantage of this provision, where families can spend dollars from their scholarship account on choice navigation services, is that what these entities do and what they tend to provide is very different from what Representative Cordelli and what Colleen were describing, where they're more describing that broader view of a family is trying to decide between a public school, a charter school, private school, is a scholarship program right for me, and really look at the full menu of options. What a lot of these organizations that are setting up as choice navigators in Florida are doing is providing a different but also necessary service, which is helping families get a lot more granular with their child, setting some goals around what are our learning objectives as we kind of move on this venture of parent-directed education. What kind of curriculum do I want to use if I want to go full homeschool? If I want to select a hybrid school, what other options might be out there that are going to help me fill the gaps in time during my child's week? And then what happens if my child falls behind in math? What troubleshooting or catch-up options are there? And so the range of services that these choice navigators provide, there's about 100 of them currently onboarded onto our platform providing services around our state, range from organizations that are really kind of your mom and pop tutoring businesses that this goal setting and sort of guidance and troubleshooting function becomes an add-on to their existing tutoring business. You have organizations that are more sort of your homeschool consultants, where maybe they already provide what in Florida are legally required evaluations for homeschool families. And now they'll also provide these navigation consultations to help you identify the right curriculum, set those learning goals. But then there's also some specialists that will go much deeper in their partnership with our families. And so some of these cater directly to, for example, students with autism. And as a parent, you can mix and match. I want this initial consultation, this help with goal setting, but then also maybe we'll provide a workshop on executive functioning, or we'll help your high schooler with autism prepare to be really successful on a college campus. And so I think that it's proven to be a very vital and valuable service to some families who are trying to adjust to the world of parent-directed education, where you're really taking responsibility as a parent for assembling the diverse education options for your children. it's really complementary to the types of services that that Colleen and Representative Cordelli were describing.
Do you have any idea how many families in Florida are utilizing that option?
So we don't. What we do, that those data are still coming in because
Okay.
we're kind of processing the expenditures from diverse sources. So some families, for example, will pay these entities out of pocket and apply for reimbursement. And so we're still collating all of that data together. But what we do know is there's about 100 different organizations that have sprung up to provide this service in the second year since the statutory provision passed.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Travis. All right, I've got a question here, and I want to direct it to both Colleen and Justin. And your answer will also hopefully be helpful with Rep. Cordelli, since he intimated that there may something's going on again in New Hampshire. But my question is, and we'll start with Justin, what are one or two of the most common things that you get feedback from your parents that would help policymakers or program managers to help improve your family's experience? So you guys have been boots on the ground for a number of years. So is there one or two takeaways that you could think of that would help improve those experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, for us, one of the most common questions, and it's just over and over again, is there's a lot of confusion over what are considered allowable expenses, particularly in the kind of ESA and microgrant context. And so what that is, in statute, we very often, or I think a lot of these programs try to create very clear guidelines around what these funds can and cannot be spent on. But a lot of the times that is very much lost in translation with families. And I think that creates a lot of difficulty in terms of families really beginning to understand what can they spend on and what can't they spend on. And I think particularly in some of the more innovative programs, right, that have really tried to expand it beyond just a program specifically for private schools, but have really tried to give families flexibility with things like devices and therapies and really the full suite of the education landscape. Families don't know where to start or what they can and can't spend on. And so I think that's what we end up spending and counseling a lot of families on, and also in turn talking to a lot of our kind of state partners about in terms of how can we create more pathways to clarify that. And I think, secondly, I think it's one of the things that most of the families that we work with at outschool.org are low income. And so we specifically work with ESA and state programs that are focused on providing funds to low income families. And so a lot of the products and tools that are used require a certain degree of just accessibility, right? In terms of digital fluency and also language fluency and capability that I think are not sometimes fully centered from the role of policymaker and regulator that we spend a lot of time kind of coaching and assisting parents through. And so that's not necessarily a question that families have, but I think it is a very, very often a pain point that we see among families, just in terms of really trying to, one of the things that we do is we simply take kind of screenshots and videos of how to use certain parts of the websites or what it looks like on a Droid phone, right, or an Android phone versus an iPhone, because they look different. And so if a lot of our families are using Android phones versus iPhones, which some of these websites are primarily developed for, it's an entirely different experience. And so there are small nuances like that we have seen also been blockers for families in the past. But the moment that there's someone there kind of helping the family through that, it kind of opens up the world of the program to them.
Okay, okay. And in that vein, so if what I'm hearing, we have one of the members of our ESA network who's a program administrator in one of the states that you and Colleen are not in. But this administrator did indicate that they polled their parents, and it seems that parents do want definitive guidelines on expenditures, that they'd rather have that than have something that's a little more open-ended. Colleen, is that kind of what you're experiencing?
Yeah, I've been taking fast and furious notes on a whole host of things, like things to follow up with and to, that have been said. So I don't want to reiterate stuff that Justin said that I agree with, but I'd say as I was listening, I bucket into like 4 big buckets. First, there's just information, right? So to the represent any legislator who may be listening to this, who's thinking about either improving, fixing, tweaking, or adopting a new bill, ESA bill, and in Texas, we have legislators right now who are on the verge of passing what I think might be one of the largest universal ESA programs in the country. And I'm very grateful to Step Up and to Travis and his team in the team in Florida, because they've essentially come in and said, if we could start over, like, here's what we would do, because they've been doing this for a really long time. And I just think they just need a shout out, because the humility and sort of willingness to lift up the hood and to say, look, y'all are showing up late to this party, but you can build a better mousetrap. Like, here's the good stuff. Here's the stuff we'd like to, after many years, let go of. So I think for us, what we're hearing from parents in all 3 states, regardless of the programs they're interested in, are information. Like, you need to invest in front-loading information. So I would argue the Education Advisory Service ought to not come out of the ESA, that it should be part of the program administration fees, and you should spend money on that. And it's different from an application or the fintech. Like, really invest in local education advisory. And this is not just self-serving, it's just real. Like, people like Justin's great. Some of us have expertise in this, and the closer you can get to the community, you ought to fund that and support local folks who are going to be helping parents in their community. So that's number 1, info, more of it, invest in it. But then there are tech glitches. Like, we hear from parents across those 3 states. So you have these tech glitches, like, the uploading, and so to me, the providers of either the application or those folks need to have like tech support, right? That's not Education Advisory Service. That's a tech support issue. And whoever is administering your application better have a good tech support team. Then the issues that come up are timing, right? So there's like a very odd kind of timing issue that really affects families, especially if you're in a brick and mortar situation, right? So in the lower income families who've never really had access to choice, now we're walking through, well, there's this process at the school, there's this process with the scholarship, then there's like this matchup, and there's timing, right? And on top of that, in some of the states, you have charter schools, which are lotteries, and magnet schools that are, kind of test-in, opt-in public schools. So this choice is great. Like, it's so good. Parents appreciate it, but it's a lot like applying to college now, in the sense that you've got privates, publics, large, small, independent, FAFSA, different, so most of us have college advisors, right? Like, kids that go through this process, and parents get advice. So I think, the processes are important. And last but not least is the funding, right? So I would just urge, if you can move your state out of a reimbursement strategy, please do that. Because for low-income parents, I just want to state what that means is you have to front money. And so many of them are so desperate to do that they will put it on a credit card, and there are a lot of predatory interest rates. And these ESAs aren't necessarily going to cover the interest payments on their credit cards. And so the goal is better, high quality education options for all of our kids, and to have more diverse schools to meet their needs, but not to put low income people in a financially difficult situation. Like, the goal isn't to have people in debt to participate for this program. So I think that the funding mechanism that the state utilizes matters. And so if you want families to feel really comfortable, we've had people say, is this taxable income? Is it going into my account? What happens? Well, what if the school needs money before for, you know, or if I have to spend money on education related expenses, but they've got to be reimbursed. These are really, really important questions that policy can fix, and you know, rules and regulations can support. So that would be my 2 cents, 5 cents, 4 cents, and largely informed. We've spent a lot of time with, you know, Travis and his team thinking about how we can sort of prepare for what is probably coming in Texas, and looking at our experience in Arizona and Florida. So yeah, that's my answer. There's a lot of stuff in there for legislators.
I'm definitely going to have to go back and listen to this one because I can't listen and take notes at the same time. So thank you, Colleen and Justin. And to speak to what you just said, and I want to move over to Travis and Rep. Cordelli, is that knowing that there is a federal school choice bill that's sitting out there and the inevitable expansion nationwide. And this is a concern in Florida. I'm not certain if it's a concern in New Hampshire, but how can we ensure that the capacity is going to meet the demand for these programs? And I'm certain, Colleen, that you're thinking about that in Texas as well. So Rep. Cordelli, let's start with you. With some more expansion in New Hampshire, how do you feel about that?
I look forward to expansion and us moving forward and helping families, because it's not just the Education Savings Account program. We have a program called Learn Everywhere in New Hampshire, whereby the state can actually certify a nonprofit like the Boys and Girls Club or the Civil Air Patrol to have courses that can result in high school credits for students issued by the State Board of Education. So parents need to know about that ability and what those programs are, where those courses are available and what they are. And it's independent of any state program for funding of schools. But one of the other things I think that we are going to concentrate on is not just education freedom for students, but education freedom for teachers. Teachers have education freedom also. In New Hampshire, 2 certified teachers can start a charter school. Micro schools, we all know about the expansion of micro schools and learning pods and learning centers. And we want to make teachers aware of the options and how they can explore those options and become entrepreneurs, because we need to expand options, especially in rural areas of New Hampshire, so that parents have a wide range of choice. So I think that that is going to be a key for us moving forward, as well as providing the information to families, is providing information to teachers who might want a different pathway.
Okay, great, thank you. Travis, I know there's been a lot of discussion on supply and demand here in Florida. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. And so first, I'd like to level set on where the growth and the dynamism is in our programs. I mentioned at the beginning that we're on track to serve over 500,000 students this school year. But so within that, we're growing by over 60,000 students this year. And that growth is really concentrated among education options that are happening outside of the 4 walls of a traditional school. So we're going to add about 40,000 students who are selecting our scholarship for students who do not attend school full-time. Another 25,000 students are going to be growing in our special needs scholarship, which of all of our programs has some of the greatest flexibility. And so the growth and the dynamism is happening among families who are homeschooling, families who are selecting hybrid schools where maybe they send their child to school a few days a week and then select other options for the rest of their time. And if that's where the growth and the dynamism is, we would want to make sure that those options are on the table in any kind of a federal school choice program. And we would also want to make sure that as other states create their programs, that they don't pigeonhole themselves into a conventional school. Conventional private schools are really the foundation of our program, and they're an essential option for many students. But we really want to make sure not to confine ourselves to that, because families are increasingly seeking more flexible options. And Representative Cordelli mentioned teachers as well. A lot of them are seeking more flexible options to start their own business, create their own micro school. A lot of those new entrepreneurial activities might look very different from having to start a full-fledged school or take a traditional classroom job. And so the more we can offer those flexible job opportunities to educators, the more we can really build momentum for our movement. The last thing I'd want to say about a flexible program is that it's going to be great to open the doors of educational options to students in states like New York and California. But I would also say that we would want to think about the interaction and the opportunity for a federal program to complement the states like Florida or New Hampshire or others that have existing programs on the books. And so some of the programs that have been circulating in Washington would be stackable, where the scholarship could offer supplemental funding or could come in alongside an existing state program. That could be huge for us in Florida, where we're looking at, what are different ways that we could enhance the spending power of low-income families to make sure that they can, for example, afford that private school tuition, but then also maybe some supplemental tutoring or other things that their child may need. And so the federal scholarship program might create a great opportunity to enhance the spending power of students who need it most, and have a great complement to our existing robust education options.
Right. And Travis, not to put you on the spot, and this is something for across the board, and other states are experiencing this, but can you speak just quickly about how Step Up is engaging with trying to bring on the districts, the public schools, and helping to serve these students, because we need to move away from this mentality of yours and mine. So what have you guys been doing?
So, and that's an excellent point, Laura, because part of the idea that the growth and the dynamism is not just students among students who are selecting one school, this school or that school full time. The school districts, for many families, students love the option that their district provides. They just don't want it to be an all or nothing proposition. And so what we hear a lot of times is, for example, that my student, is attending they're homeschooling for part of the day, but then we would love for them to be able to march in the band. And if you want to march in the band, you have to take a class at your local school. Well, that school district should be compensated for offering that class and that programming to that student. And so as we've had more and more families embracing these really flexible scholarship opportunities where they're not attending just this school or that school full time, our districts have actually heard a ton of bottom up demand from families saying, I want to take one class at my local public school. I want to take a half day of programming at my local public school. And then I, as a family, will custom design the other half of the day. And so districts have been responding, and they've been increasingly onboarding, whether it's their virtual programs, whether it's, which is Brevard Public Schools, for example, has onboarded their district operated virtual school, whether it's in-person classes. We're even seeing some rural districts like Glades County that is providing in-person classes for its scholarship students. And we're seeing some of our large urban districts as well. This is a real logistical challenge for the larger districts to think through, but they have seen the demand from families and they are working on responding. And so this idea that it's scholarship programs or school districts is frankly outdated. We're increasingly seeing in Florida that that the question is, how can we come alongside districts, partner with them, and help them offer those customizable learning options that families are demanding.
Great, thank you, thank you. And I know that Justin and Colleen, you guys have encountered that in your respective states that you're servicing as well. And I'm sure Rep. Cordelli, you're seeing the same thing. I often, when I was with the Department of Education here in Florida, trying to get districts to come on board, a lot of it was just that it was just too much trouble. it was too much trouble to come up with the payment, the exchange of payment, the invoicing. And I'm hoping that they can overcome that and come up with something more seamless. So I want to leave us with a few minutes for some questions. I've got some colleagues that I believe have some questions. So again, if there's anybody on the call that wants to ask any questions that haven't been asked and answered, that would be great. Abby, are you on?
Yes. Yeah, I was thinking about Texas, Colleen, as you mentioned. Obviously that would be a lot of students and a lot of different providers all in the same area. So thinking ahead to if that program passed, how are you guys thinking about adapting from students looking for a single private school to now a collection of providers and adjusting your model?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've been fast and furiously thinking about that a lot this year, and I think we're in a good position having, spent time in Arizona and Florida. So this isn't new to us in the sense that like we think having an education advisory service that is both a sort of a generalist level and then the specialist, as Travis pointed out, is really the way to go. And so the specialists can range from kind of this, what I would say is almost like a counseling, like to the point of like really helping people with I like to call it like choose your own adventure, right? The putting together, finding curriculum for people who want to do that. I think a lot of folks though, really are looking, even if they're doing a micro school or a hybrid homeschool, there's lots of great curriculum. There's lots of programs. There's, Primer, Prenda, KaiPod, Black Mothers Forum. There's lots of like, I don't call it school in a box, but programs that are really doing good work where you can direct folks who want to sort of create a flexible model. If folks are really wanting to kind of do the homeschool, like do it yourself, dig down without kind of the guidance of an organization, we do think we'll need to have what we would call a specialist program. But even that aside, like I think that's the most sort of intense model. We don't expect in Texas sort of out of the box. If we have so much pent up demand, and I think this program potentially could be very significant. And right now we have private schools that do serve low income families who have low income kids in those seats. And we think that those folks would be hopefully eligible. And then they have lots of empty seats. So there's a ton of demand. Like I said, we serve thousands of families across the state. There will be demand for this program. And I think from a capacity standpoint, the most obvious place initially will be private schools that have historically served low-income kids that have capacity, and they exist despite sort of some of the rhetoric to the contrary. They're out there. So that's first and foremost. But as you think sort of year 2, year 3, as we bring more folks on, because we will have a cap on the program in the first year, and then hopefully we'll grow based on demand. I think you're going to have a lot more of the sort of stacking, creating your own sort of the folks who aren't interested in maybe custodial care, right? Like a traditional model. So we think the way to move is to have generalists and specialists, and those specialists should be regionally based. We do have other groups in our state who right now currently work with families. There's San Antonio Charter Moms, there's Parent Shield in Fort Worth. So we've been actually coordinating and meeting with them and listening to them to have these conversations as ed advisors in our state. To talk about how when the passage of a potential ESA may really change the landscape for us. 2, can we manage the demand? 3, like, how are we going to be sustainably funded? Like, I actually do believe that there ought to be, as I said before, state dollars to all of these organizations that are doing this work, because to sustain this in a consistent, high quality way and rely on philanthropy is really insane when there's like millions of state dollars being put into these programs, and marketing, communications, and parent support are included. But that said, we don't know what's going to pass, right? Like none of us have a vote. We're trying very hard to think about how we operate next year, but then plan for this kind of tiered model of support moving forward. Does that answer your question? Great, great.
All right. And Colleen, to your point, and thank you so much for that answer, is one of the things that we've consistently heard from states that are just onboarding their new ESA programs is that, so you're working with other nonprofits regionally throughout the state, is to make sure that there's a uniform message. That that people aren't, getting misinformation and that everybody's on the same page, so to speak. But thank you so much for that. I think my colleague Ben DeGrow has a question for Justin.
Hi, yeah, this question's for Justin and OutSchool. At ExcelNet, we're big champions of universal eligibility ESA programs, but we also at the same time value the equity kind of work you all doing with low-income communities. So I'm curious, based on the states you all worked on, this assisting parents, what are the kind of the one or two lessons you would have for states that want to do universal, but don't want to leave behind the low-income kids who need that extra help?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, Ben. I think in our experience, to design a program that is inclusive of low income learners and families really requires a very specific and targeted focus, right? I think, we had the privilege of working with the Virginia Department of Education when they rolled out their Learning Acceleration Grant, which was the largest micro grant in the country. And I think what they did was really prudent, right? They gave families who were below poverty level access to $3,000, and families who were not considered below poverty level access to $1,500. And so each learner got $1,500 or $3,000 based on their poverty level. I think that mechanism and that distinction between the kind of inequity that existed was really prudent and smart. And what they also did was engage us specifically to provide services to the families who were low income, recognizing on their end that when looking at the data, the low income families were not spending at the same rate as the families who had less funds but had more access and more fidelity and probably were more accustomed to making these decisions. And there was a choice there, right? I mean, it was, if we don't do something to get these low income families to spend their funds, because of the way that the policy was written, they were going to lose access to those funds. And so in kind of engaging us to support them specifically with navigation services, I mean, we were able to get low income families to spend about $4 million that otherwise would have gone completely unspent. And in turn, that created an opportunity for about 12,500 families to get access to resources that would have otherwise been left on the table. And so, Ben, I think to your question, I think I similarly agree that universality is a really important and admirable kind of objective of a lot of these programs. What I do appreciate is that a lot of states are focusing and are starting these programs with kind of low income families in mind and at the forefront. And I think that the ability to do that successfully does also require, to Colleen's point, really investing in the infrastructure kind of necessary to support these families well. I think it is one thing to invest in recruiting and marketing to make sure that you hit the kind of caps of the programs. But more important, or just as important, is making sure that those families have a really successful experience of the program and continue to stay enrolled in the program and find the education options that they want. And, the kind of equity consideration isn't just giving low-income families priority access or giving them more funds. It's actually giving them kind of access to the everything that they need in order to make successful use of those programs. And, we kind of fundamentally believe and have seen that navigation and education advisory services are a really critical component of that equity consideration. And otherwise, I think that there's a risk that programs that are designed specifically for low income families or have give priority to those families, and don't see success in that, right? Or that the data is not as compelling or successful as they would like it to be, there then becomes a narrative of, well, these families don't want it, or this is not for those families, and so we're not going to prioritize them or consider them or center them, when that's simply not true, right? I think it's just the policies and the infrastructure around these policies have to, I think, recognize where these families are and meet them where they are, and invest in the resources like Colleen and I are putting out there to support the families.
Thank you, Justin. And you made a great point, and one that I have to admit I haven't given a lot of thought to, but it's more than just bringing those families on board. It's developing that relationship and making sure that they are successful in these programs year after year. And I know that that's what everybody on this panel is doing, and I appreciate the boots on the ground that Colleen and Justin and Rep. Cordelli and Travis have all done. So I appreciate your time today. We are out of time. Thank you. Are there any last words from anyone? I don't want to cut us off.
I would just like to add that I've learned a lot from being on the panel with Travis and Colleen and Justin, who have been out there and doing this work. And so it provides me a lot of information and ideas going forward as we try and follow in their footsteps in New Hampshire.
Thank you. Yes, I hope these relationships don't end with this call. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Have a great holiday, and we'll talk to you soon.